Hello and welcome back to the Book Club podcast. I am your host, Matt from Ohio. And as many who have been listening to the podcast for a while now might know, I have a decent background in ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, where it all began. Spoiler alert, but I thought I was so cool back at university because I was studying the dudes who created thought. But did you all know that some of the most prominent Greek thinkers that we put up on high pedestals, like Pythagoras and Plato, to name a couple that you might know, actually traveled to Egypt to study geometry and astrology and theology, stuff like that with the Egyptian priests? Greek wasn't really where it began. And I guess that's my great segue today, because I am joined by author and scholar Malayna Evans. Born and raised in Utah, where she climbed mountains as a kid, Malayna has called Chicago home for her entire adult life. She has master's degrees, plural, in Greek, Roman, and Near East history, as well as a PhD in Egyptian history. While not traveling the world or spending time with her children, Malayna likes to write books, hence why she's on this lovely show, and the latest of which is Isis of Egypt, Goddess of Thrones. It's a retelling of the birth or creation of the pantheon of Egyptian gods and goddesses, the coup of Atum, the search for Osiris's 14 parts, and the coup of Set, all told from the perspective of Isis, and it's out June 1st. Malayna, welcome to the show.
I'm going to start with the correction. What kind of fabulous guest am I? It's out June 23rd. So run it
okay.
Everybody. Yes. But thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. And I love that intro. It kind of reminds me a little bit of my own history, but I'm sure we'll get to that.
It is pretty weird the way that Europeans, I guess the European narrative of history has kind of turned Greece and Rome into the beginning of all things. And it really kind of reminds me of, we all thought the atom was the smallest thing ever until 40, 50 years ago. And then we split it open, a whole other bunch of shit fell out. And it's sort of like that with Rome and Greece when you learn about Egypt.
I mean, that's exactly right. I thought, like you, because, we probably both come from a pretty Eurocentric educational background. Everything started with Greece. So I went to get a master's. I wanted to understand, why are we like this? So many things don't seem quite right to me, like who put men in charge, for example. So I kind of went back to study, and I learned what I really learned studying in Greece and Rome was, wait a minute, they took all these ideas from Egypt and Mesopotamia. So I kind of had that same aha moment.
Yeah. I gotta tell you, I don't know if you've ever come across this, but at a certain point, you kind of, as an academic, you sort of find out that a lot of people don't like listening to you talk about, academics and history and stuff. Have you ever come across that?
Have I come across that? I don't know. I think in my
maybe you're
normal life.
Yeah, are you like in an echo chamber where it's all good?
No, definitely not. I mean, I'm in Chicago, but with roots in Utah, so I jump between echo chambers sometimes. So yes, I don't think everybody is receptive to me saying things like, well, we got our writing system from ancient Egypt, because that's not who they want to credit. I think we don't give Egypt nearly the kind of credit in our system that we really should for. We inherited a lot from them, and I don't think that people by and large know this. I was so annoyed not too long ago when a school teacher told me that they took Egypt out of the core. Used to be in the core. Now you got all this time to study Greece, which, no offense to the Greek scholars here, but it's like a hot second. Egypt's history is so long. You know what I mean? The time from the pyramids to the death of Cleopatra is greater than the time from Christ to us. You know what I mean? It's a really long history and important history, and I don't necessarily think it gets the due it should. There's my little Egyptology spiel. So yeah, not everybody wants to hear that, I guess.
Yeah, I actually have in my notes that I don't think many people really appreciate just how ancient Egypt is.
Yeah, that's right.
Because when we think of Greece, a lot of people will think of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, that
Right.
time period,
That's right.
which is sort
Yep.
of like the 400s BC.
Yep.
And when we think of Egypt, we generally think of like King Tut, Ramses, that happy time period, which is like 1100 years earlier. But
Right.
by
And
that point,
1,000 years
Egypt
after the
had
pyramids were built. I think the other thing people think
exactly,
about the pyramid builds, that's 1,000 years before that.
yeah. And Egypt had been established for like 2000 years before that.
Yeah.
So, and to put it all in perspective, America is having its 250
Right.
year anniversary in like a monthish.
Yep. Yep.
So, I guess with all of that kind of context, would you mind giving listeners kind of a crash course in Egyptian mythology?
Sure. Let's see. What do you need to know about mythology? The biggest thing to know about Egyptian mythology, I would say there's two big things. One is there's a gazillion gods, and I mean like over 1,500. There are big gods and little gods. There are gods that created the world, several of them. There are quite a few different competing creation myths. Although we see those as competing, an ancient Egyptian, I don't think would. They don't categorize things concretely and neatly
Hmm.
like we do. I think everything is, all edges are kind of blurry. So you see that with the gods, that Atum and Re might be two different gods. They might be Atum Re, one god. You never really know. It changes. They might be a god that looks like a man. They might be a goddess that looks like a woman. They might be a goddess that's a cow one minute and the next a cow-headed woman. You know what I mean? Like the boundaries are not firm. So you have all these deities, they're syncretic. They merge into different species as well as into each other. Um, I think I mentioned there are a lot of competing origin myths. Isis is part of the Heliopolitan Ennead, which is the big three gods of the or nine gods of the Heliopolitan creation story. And that is where Atum creates the world. He has two kids. They have two kids. They have
Mm-hmm.
four kids. That's the nine.
Heliocentric meaning like Earth centric, right?
Meaning
Centric.
Heliopolitan is the name of a location in Egypt. That's
Oh,
the
okay.
creation kind of adhere to different locations.
See, here's my Greek background. Helio meaning
Oh yeah, right.
sun.
Sure.
So, anyways, okay,
Yes.
yes, um, okay. With it being so ancient, it's still so enduring.
Yeah. I mean,
What is it about the
human
Egyptian mythology that like sticks around today with us?
that's actually a good question. Because I will say I'm gonna give your Greek folks a little credit here. Egyptians mythology isn't as fun story-wise. You know what I mean? Like the Greek gods have these amazing stories. They might make you angry. You might feel some things, but you will feel some things. Egyptian gods don't really. I mean, Isis is the only one I think has this real clear story arc. Most of them don't have these story arcs to the same degree. They're fascinating, though. Partly, I think it has to do with the animal headedness. You know what I mean? Like aesthetically, nothing is like Egypt, and you can see something Egyptian themed, even if you know almost nothing, and be like, "Oh, that feels like very ancient Egyptian." It's a unique, distinct look, and I think that's part of what sticks in people's minds. It's just the aesthetics of it.
Okay, aesthetics. I wasn't actually thinking you were going to go with aesthetics because I think a lot of of the things that stick in my head when I read Egyptian mythology is just, I guess, how relevant a lot of the themes of the stories are. Um, and I think what's going to be really interesting about our conversation is yes, you are retelling mythology, but doing so within a fictional process gives us the opportunity for allegory of some kind
Mhm.
due to a lot of the themes that are throughout and I guess what I'm talking about there is we have like parent child family relationship
Right.
problems,
Yeah.
nepotism,
Yeah.
um, utilitarianism, right?
Mhm.
The different modes of ethics,
Yeah.
the
I mean,
idea
I
of
like your answer a lot. Yes, I think that there are things that resonate that are important to them that were important to us, and I don't think sure, I'm the writer of this story, so of course I put my parent-child thoughts into this version, but they're not ancient Egyptian.
Mhm.
I mean, she does battle to put Horus on the throne. I didn't make that up. A lot of these things are come from the actual sources. And so you can see the humanity of the story that we share. And so there are some ways that you're just like, wow, these guys lived thousands of years ago, or in Isis's case, didn't really live, but made up by people who lived thousands of years ago. And we still feel her pain as a mother. We still sort of feel the mourning of losing a loved one. There's a lot about her story that resonates with us in meaningful and deep ways.
Where does where does the academia around mythology stop and the fictionalized version of mythology begin in your writing here?
In this book specifically, yeah, that's such a good question. Writing this book was um like doing a big puzzle, but without a picture of what the puzzle should be. Like, there are so many different pieces of Isis's story that come from different periods. I mean, she's worshipped for thousands of years, and not just by the Egyptians, by the Greeks, by the Romans. I mean,
Mhm.
her cult lasts a very long time. And there's different stories that come from the pyramid text, from little bits of like magical papyri we have, from um uh, Plutarch's on Isis and Osiris. So we have these
Mhm.
different sources. I had to kind of, when I started to do this, think, okay, am I going to like follow one source? And the only one you could really do that with probably was Plutarch, which is late, right? That's not my expert period. But also pulls a lot of Greek influences. Her mythology and Demeter's kind of overlap at points. But what I decided to do instead was just take whatever I wanted and lose whatever I wanted, adapt whatever
Okay.
I wanted, and be completely agnostic about it. So there's this, and I think you nodded to this earlier, there's this tension between being a historian that wants to honor the past and writing a fantasy book, um, and being a person in the world today that has opinions about the world today. And if I'm going to go to the trouble of writing a book, I might have something to say about the world we live in today. And I do happen to think that Isis's story is pertinent. I think it matters to I think it's relevant right now today in some ways. So, I took different inspiration from different parts of the story. Would you like me to give you kind of a weird example?
Heck yeah.
All right, let me give you a weird example. There is from like a little magical papyri, this story that is not connected to any other parts of her story, called Isis and the Seven Scorpions. So basically, it's this story of Isis has seven scorpions companions. She goes into some little village. She's in disguise as a poor person. She asks a rich woman for help. The woman's mean to her. Another goddess, the scorpion goddess, Selket, sees this. She's so mad at the woman that she has her little scorpions attack the woman's son. Isis finds this out. She goes and cures the son because it wasn't the son's fault, obviously. And Isis can probably protect herself. But this is just comes from a cure for snake bites or for scorpion bites, right? That's what that is. It's not really a intrinsic part of her story. But I read that and I think, why is Isis running around Egypt with a bunch of scorpions? Like, and what does Selka have to do with anything? I mentioned the many gods. There are these little gods or household gods that, have small roles. They're some of the
Mhm.
best gods. They're my favorite gods, by the way. But Selka is one of them. She's not somebody you run into a lot. She's kind of the goddess of scorpions. She shows up if people get bitten or want to get cured.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that little bit of that story really influenced me to create a relationship between Isis, Selkit, and a band of scorpions. And it made, say, scorpions more important in my story than they would have been. So I just kind of took things from different pieces, and some of them I followed quite religiously. The Plutarch story has this version where Isis, searching for Osiris's body, goes to Byblos, and she meets with some like the queen's maidservants, and she kind of does their hair to trick them into inviting her in. I plucked that full bore. There are pieces where I'm just like, oh, I'll just follow this bit of story, and others where I'm just like, I'll zig here or zag there. So I don't know, pretty agnostic, I would say.
I think that's really, really cool because I can't tell you the number of times while reading this book I had hard deja vu. I'm
Really?
like, "I've read this before."
Oh,
And then
funny.
like 5 pages later, you're like, "I haven't read any of this before." And I thought that was really, really interesting. And I don't know if everybody would have that experience reading your
Right.
book. But for example, the Selkit relationship where Isis, it's almost like a redemption arc. It's her coming up, right?
Elsa?
Um, and but it's also, why should we care about the minor gods? Now we have one in front of us that we can empathize with and relate
Mhm.
to, and sort of like, behind every great man there is a great woman. Behind
Right.
every Egyptian um, god there is a great goddess, and apparently behind every great goddess there is a minor god, kind of a thing, right?
Yeah, I really did wanna put some minor gods, and I would have liked to have worked more in Taweret's in there, Ammit, Bes, some of my favorite, minor gods, and play some unexpected roles. But yeah, I love the minor gods. I think they're really interesting. There's not a lot of stories about them, but nonetheless, just like their role in society is so personal and so real. And it's easy to think if I were in ancient Egypt and I were, say, a pregnant woman, then Taweret would really mean a lot to me. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
that would be an important relationship. And this idea of this polytheistic world where you can go to different gods for different needs because they're sort of specialized. I don't know. I find that appealing.
uh Trivia for anybody who has not read this book yet. Amit is a linchpin. Gotta love it.
She kind of is.
So, um,
Uh-huh.
let's step back out of mythology, but be
Okay.
tangential to it for a second and talk history. Um, how back in the day, how did ancient Egyptians talk about, depict, learn about the gods and goddesses? How did that go down between oral tradition, hieroglyphs, all of those different things?
Right. So only 1% of the population could read. So hieroglyphs aren't terribly important, but what would be important that even somebody who couldn't read would take in would be all of the images of gods on temple walls and such, right? There's a lot of imagery of gods everywhere. Papyri, temple walls, even if you don't read what it says, you can sort of understand the imagery. Certainly a lot of it was oral. There also seemed to be kind of plays, festivals. The gods all had houses, right? Their temples, and they would visit each other in their houses. And so a bunch of priests would put the gods on a like hidden, I don't know, kind of like a float where you couldn't see the god inside, but he'd be in a very fancy float, and they would carry him. In some cases, in certain periods, people could go up to the god and ask him questions. There is in the museum and University of Chicago's campus a god with a hole in his head. It's a statue of Horus with a hole in his head. And it's thought that a tube ran through there. So some priest could have spoken. So it would sound like Horus was talking. So people would celebrate the gods' birthdays, the gods moving to see each other, like a lot of the celebrations, just like we celebrate Christmas, you know what I mean? Easter, our celebrations are kind of religiously grounded as well. Theirs had to do with the gods. And so probably festivals that would tell the stories, but also just seeing their gods on temple walls, in streets. A lot of fun things like not everybody could go inside of a temple, but often outside the temple, there would be kind of a saint, sometimes a human that had a goddish statue
Oh, okay.
or stature. And people could go to that person and ask them to be an intermediary, and they would leave little clay ears so that the god could hear them. So there's a lot of like, and then of course the other piece of that is the dead. For living ancient Egyptians, the other really good resource would be dead people, like their family. So they would do things like, you know, in order for the dead to be strong in the afterlife, they have to be fed. People have to say their name. You can't just be forgotten. You'll shrivel up and die in the afterlife. So you have very fancy tombs, right? Because you're dead forever, but you don't live that long. And so people would take, say, bowls and they would write letters in the bowls like, "Dear Grandma, you know, Taweret, I really want to have a baby, but things aren't coming together for me. Can you help me?" And then they'd fill the bowl with food and leave it for the grandma 'cause that way when she ate the food, she would, of course, hear the request, right? So there's a lot of, like, tricking
Oof.
people into, you know, gods. There's some there are letters written to gods, like, "If you don't do this for me, I'm gonna be mean to you." I actually reference that in the book because I think that's kind of hilarious. But,
Wildly different from what we do today,
right.
where we can't be mean, that we have to beseech, right?
Yes. There was plenty of beseeching. People would leave images of themselves, like little statuettes of themselves near temples so that they were kind of perpetually in adoration of the gods. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of it was a resource for people that didn't people think that you lived 3,000 years ago. I think we are quick to think they weren't quite as smart as us. They were every bit as smart, but they maybe had a different understanding of the world than we do.
Mhm.
You wouldn't have understood science the way we understand science and such. But they have plenty of resources, and the gods, the dead, these are spirits. These are resources that they can approach, beseech, threaten. So useful in life.
I like how in the book you tie in a lot of the world of the dead, into, obviously, Osiris's story, as well as Anubis, and Amit, and et cetera, et cetera. Um, and then we get, Maneros and, Susie's family.
Yeah,
So,
that's
um,
straight from the Greek
I
tradition, those guys. But yeah,
I really enjoyed that, because it almost felt like, when writing this book, you didn't just tell Isis's story, you stitched together the Egyptian mythos to tell a lot of stories.
I love that. That's exactly what I had in mind. There were points where, like with Moneros, I really wanted to be like, I wanted to make that more meaningful than it is in any of the Egyptian, in the ancient versions. I was like, well, that feels like that would be a pretty traumatic thing for this very empathetic goddess to go through. And so I wanted to tie that. I did stitch that together with the Osiris bit of the story just to kind of elevate it, give it more meaning, and create a kind of redemption arc with it.
Yeah, it kinda hits you in the feels a little bit, which books should do on some level, you know?
Right.
Um, okay, so with over 1,500, I think there's a lot more than 1,500 gods and goddesses, but I think only, what, 1,500-ish of them have names that we know of, something like that?
Right. I'm not
So
sure
out
anybody
of
count the versions because there's all sorts of little strange, like, and a lot of them aren't human. Tree goddesses, that they're cool. I don't know. There's a lot of kinds of goddesses, correct?
the book is obviously told from Isis's perspective, but, let's talk some of these gods and goddesses.
Okay.
Who is your favorite, and why?
My favorite, I think Selkut is probably my favorite. Amit is a goddess that's close to my heart. Actually, I have a business and it's named Amit. And she was big in my last book too, had a kind of a big role. I just like the idea of this kind of in my mind. This is not, this is just kind of my imagination of Amit, and she is this way in the book. And Disney did what was that book that series they did a couple years ago? Can't remember the name of it, but their version of Amit totally matched my own idea of this kind of old church lady, this very polite woman, but she gobbles up the heart of the dead. She doesn't decide if you get a happy afterlife or not, but if you don't, she's the devourer who devours hearts. So
Mhm.
this idea of I think it's maybe in my life I've known these really lovely, sweet women who are fierce. And in my mind, that's Amit. So I wanted to bring her in. I love Bess. I think he's an interesting god, so I wanted to pull him in. Um, and I wanted to explore. I think a lot of people would have really zoomed in on the romance of Isis and Osiris. I wanted that to be there, but I also wanted to show her as a sister, as a daughter, and importantly, as a single mother. Because in the end, Isis is a single mother. That's where her story
Mhm.
lands. Sorry if that's a spoiler for some of you who don't know anything about Isis's story. But I kind of wanted to sort of look at it from different angles. So I brought in characters that I thought would kind of speak to those aspects.
Did you have a favorite god or goddess to actually personify when writing the book?
I mean, I just think Isis herself, right? Because the thing about Isis is she's a trickster god. But she's also very empathetic, and we have a lot of tricksters in our stories that we all see, right? We love a trickster, but a trickster with a heart is kind of a little extra special. So I kind of wanted to make sure you readers understood her as a trickster, but also understood her as just kind of a uniquely empathetic god. Because
Hmm.
the reason she is so empathetic is because she has a lot of loss, right? We think of gods as kind of in these beautiful houses. I wanted to put Isis in the mud, sweating, feeling hunger pains. I wanted to bring her to earth and, humanize her in a way, so we could sort of see her pain and understand kind of how that influences her kind of empathy, because she is a uniquely empathetic god.
Okay, let's talk about ISIS for a second. I think um, there's a couple of key components about ISIS that I did want to touch on. The first, I wanted to get your take on this. Um, I think it's a moment when Selket is kind of stipulating the characteristics that she would require in the next king of the gods. And there's three, and I'm going to not remember them perfectly, but she mentions the wisdom of somebody else and
Katharina.
the empathy of Isis.
Yeah.
And Isis is almost takes a little bit of offense to that. So I wanted to ask, Isis is the goddess of wisdom and thrones and all of that, but
Sure.
is her wisdom, we think of wisdom as a very academic pursuit, but is what the book is saying that wisdom is really being able to understand and feel others.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was trying to make her like a high EQ type, wisdom character. And the other thing is there's other goddesses of wisdom. So what Selkut references Hathor. So I also wanted to show she has this kind of petty side. Like, what do you mean because one thing about Isis in my book is she is supremely confident. If anything, that's kind of
Yes.
her fault, is that she is overconfident at times. But that was fun for me to write. Everything else I've written have been kind of younger women. About all my other books come from either someone's younger, they're all younger. This is my first, like, grown woman protagonist, and so I really had fun writing just this very, confident, almost arrogant character. That was fun for me. But the other thing about that particular scene is I don't remember, I also don't remember, it's like justice, empathy, wisdom,
Uh-huh.
truth, something like that. Those are the values. That's where I think you see me in the book. I sort of made
Okay.
ISIS a bit of a small d Democrat because there's tension, like, the story's about nepotism. The original story is about nepotism, like, my
Yes.
son should be the king because he's my son. I wanted to nuance that a little bit for a modern audience and think about sort of how we might ideally think about, where it's not totally totalitarian dictatorships, but there's a little
Hmm.
democracy going on here, and there are values at play, and we want to discuss the values. So, that is, me taking a lot of liberties with the way an actual ISIS would have thought, to kind of put some of my own thoughts into the book a little bit. I really wanted to show her as a political actor as well, like, what's she really fighting for? What do politics mean to ISIS? And
Hmm.
you could easily just be like, "Well, it means I'm in charge and my husband's in charge and my kid's in charge. Boom, that's it." But I wanted her to be a little more appealing to modern audiences.
I think in that vein, one of the things that really stuck with me was Isis, Selkut, and her sister Nephthys, kind of essentially explaining privilege to Horus.
Right?
Uh, and I think what I really enjoyed was Horus turning it over in his mind and eventually going, "Oh yeah, you guys are right."
Yeah,
And isn't that a refreshing thought?
yeah, right. I wanted to touch on some of these notions without readers feeling like I was, like, shoving it down their throat. But, it is my book. I wrote it. I have things to say about the world, so I put them in the book, and, not everybody will love it, and
Mm.
that's okay.
I will say that I didn't feel as though anything was. I never felt like I was being beaten around the head with an agenda.
Okay.
So I know that we're talking about these things, but for anybody
Yeah,
listening, you will not feel beaten around the head with an agenda. I
yeah.
promise.
Yeah. There's not a lot of
Oh,
it in there, but it peeks in from time to time. My views on the world are there for those who are interested.
I suppose one other thing about ISIS that you brought up that I also wanted to talk about is something that is most associated, I think, in the world, connotated with Greek um, gods, goddesses, and just Greek culture in general, and that is the higher value being attributed to the mind, tricking, as opposed to putting all of your value in sheer brutality, strength,
Right.
etc. Um, how does that fit into the Egyptian mythos? And is that something that is typically attributed to Isis? Is Isis like a Loki, for example?
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
typical?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
She is a Loki. She's a sweethearted Loki. And I think it fits comfortably. I don't, Greeks did not invent deep thought or self-reflection. You know what I mean? I think you get a lot of that in Egyptian sources. I mean, I think we tend to think of ancient Egyptians as all sort of maybe religious fanatics, but there's the phrase, drink, uh, for tomorrow you may die. What a drink, eat, be merry, for tomorrow you may die. That the
Would
ancestor
be
of
that'll
that
be
is
Dave
literally.
Matthews. That'd be Dave Matthews from the Crash album, from the song Tripping Billies. Is
I love that.
eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die. That
So
is
that notion is clear in some ancient Egyptian sources. Like this is all going to end. Like be good to each other, love each other. I mean, I would say if you were interested in learning about this, the place to go might be ancient Egyptian wisdom literature, which is a lot of like be kind to the vulnerable. Don't be an arrogant jerk. Like be thoughtful, self-reflect, ask yourself if you're really right or wrong. There's a lot of that in ancient Egyptian wisdom literature specifically, but elsewhere you find it. So I find that sort of, that is someplace where I don't feel like I stretch the Egyptian worldview like I did with the maybe politics a little bit more.
your novel was marketed to me as a feminist retelling of ISIS, and but I think that's a little bit of a loaded statement of sorts because it has the word feminist in it and it has the word retelling in it.
Yeah.
So um, outside of, I know we've kind of touched on how you stitched a whole lot of stuff together and how you've taken some liberties, but from a purely academic standpoint, I am curious how your retelling differs from the generally accepted academic version of retellings.
I guess I have two answers. One thing is that I do think all of this genre, like every
Mhm.
book in this genre gets called a feminist retelling. And then people are like, oh, I
Oh,
like
okay.
feminist retelling, so I'm going to read this genre, right? So it's somewhat that.
Okay.
A lot of those stories earn it because, well, Medusa, who has, I don't know, 28 books, I've read at least 10 retellings of Medusa, she has been maligned, perhaps unfairly. So to retell her story from a feminist perspective brings a new lens. Isis has not been maligned in this way. She doesn't need to, be retold. No one's beating up Isis really. So I don't know that I would use that phrase. I would say
Okay.
that as a feminist, where I had to pause and be like, huh, how am I going to make ISIS give her some kind of modern day feminist leanings, but also tell the story is that ISIS in the myths empowers her husband and empowers her son, and she does it through trickery. She doesn't ever say, "Why don't I just rule? Because I seem to be the smartest of all of us." And she is clearly even in the, she's the most active. Osiris kind of sits there and takes what she does, more or less. He's not as accomplished as Isis is in the mythology, but nonetheless, he's the one that rules. So I had to
Mhm.
think about that. Like, how can I make that make sense to me in a way that I really like Isis and see her as a kind of, I don't know, proto-feminist type, you know what I mean, where she is fighting for women. And I did that through different ways, I guess. But one way is I just kind of imagined her as kind of a lead from behind leader, right? She doesn't want to be in the spotlight, but she is still leading. So, that was maybe one little trick I used to kind of keep her feminist friendly, I would say. You know, I don't want people to read it and be like, why isn't she just in charge? Well, because she doesn't take charge. That's not the myth. But I did have to think through that from a feminist lens a little bit. And the other thing is I just think she has what is referred to in the myths as her wandering years, where she is actually
Yeah.
wandering Earth as a human. I really wanted to kind of show her impacting women specifically as she went through the world. So she hooks up with a prostitute and makes sure she doesn't get pregnant, right? She does kind of things as she's going through the world, kind of quite focused on women and annoyed by men who don't sort of see the value of women. So I would say that there are a few places where I throw a little feminism in there from because I'm a feminist, and maybe even a little intersectionality in some ways. Do I think she needed a feminist retelling because she's been maligned by history? I do not, but many others do.
I think, well, I think why I would like to talk about feminism
Okay.
with you is because I feel like over the years, especially with our contemporary times, feminism means very different things to different people, and it's not
Yeah.
necessarily always in the best light. And one of
No.
the things I actually really appreciated about this book is it isn't the bra burners. It's not
Yeah.
it's a very I'll let you talk more about it. But
Yeah. I mean, it's not a man hating type book, but I don't
no,
think they,
there's
I
a
don't
little bit. She
actual
makes
feminist.
she makes one man. I think she makes him
Yeah.
impotent in
She
her
deserves,
wandering years, which is
she
great.
deserves
I
it.
love it.
She was right. So yes, I
Uh,
did want to show sort of that portion. I know a lot of feminists. I don't know any feminists who hate men, right? That is a thing people say about feminists that I don't think feminists would ever say about ourselves. Um, so yes, I do think people are like, "Ooh, feminist bad, men hating." I just think that maligns people who are really modern day feminists are trying to pursue systemic equities.
yes.
I think modern day feminists tend to see this not just about gender, but about race, sexual orientation. I mean, it's quite
Mhm.
intersectional and the way these things all relate. Um, I think if you talk about feminism in the ancient world, that's a difficult word to use in the ancient world. They
Sure.
wouldn't have talked about it in that way. But there's certainly a lot of examples, certainly from Greek, drama of women subverting patriarchy, um, using soft power. My last book was very much about soft power. So there are ways that, women are still trying to find equity. They just maybe aren't thinking about it or acting in the kind of systemic ways that modern day feminists do. But it is really just about equity. And I did try to put a little of those notions of equity in the book, but you can't go too far. She is a god. She's a goddess. She's dealing with humans. They're
Right.
not exactly the same, but I did want to show her empathizing with humans. And so at the very beginning of the book, she kind of befriends a human. And I think that's kind of important in sort of tying those things together a little bit. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, and we can go a couple steps with it. I really, really appreciate personally that you're using the word equity over equality because they're very related but very, very different. Could you talk about with you what your current view of feminism is in your mind, and maybe how that might have changed over the last 20, 30, 40 years of our modern history?
I kind of feel like what has changed in modern history is women have made up gaps in many ways. There's no equality still, but they have certainly systemically have the same rights. We can go to college, we can
Mhm.
get an education, we can have a checking account, we can vote, we can do all these things, right? And it feels like a lot of women, and I guess I would say this myself, have realized I'm happy by myself. You know what I mean? Like, I can make my own money, I can have my own laugh. If people think I'm a lonely cat lady, they're wrong because I have dogs, not cats. So, in fact, I'm an unlonely solo dog lady. I'm fine with it. And that has led to this sort of male loneliness epidemic. People don't talk about female loneliness, right? They talk about male loneliness.
Uh-huh.
And
Of
there's
course.
this sense that women are supposed to fix that. But the fix to that is probably with men. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think women should be Like, we're not here to hurt you, but we're also not here. We For the first time in modern history, a woman can live a complete, total, full life without a male partner. Not that long ago, she couldn't have a house without a male partner, right? She couldn't have a bank account. She couldn't have money. She couldn't take care of
Hmm.
herself. So we're not in this needy position anymore. And I think we're getting a blowback that has people talking about repealing the 19th Amendment, or, there is talk about sort of how awful these women are, blaming women for this male loneliness. And I think the fact that if men are struggling, and in some ways, I do think there are stats that suggest men are struggling. There are more women in college. There are a lot more women in med school. We're like, why is that? But the answer to that can't be to look at women and be like, what are you doing wrong? I think that has to be sort of something that men work to figure out for themselves. And as a woman, you help. I have a son. I want to kind of help him see sort of things from different angles. I think it's complicated though, and I think there's some empathy for like how complicated it is. Can you hit on somebody, or is that uninvited? I don't know. It seems like that would be
Yes,
hard out in the world today. And so I do have empathy for that, but I just don't want us blaming women for that, because we're just going about our business and,
agreed.
trying to create our lives, and we just want to maintain the rights that we've earned to create life. That is another thing, if I may segue a little bit, and we'll see if you agree with this. I do think, as an ancient historian, I think we're always mindful that history is not linear. I think most Americans don't have that long view, and American
No.
history is taught as if it's linear. Like, we did these bad things. We had slaves, but then we didn't. You know what I mean? Like, World War II happened, but we won, so it's okay. I mean, we just act like we maybe did a bad thing, but we fixed ourselves, so it's okay. You know what I mean? Like, it's very linear, and it lulls people into not realizing how quickly progress can be taken away. Right?
Yes.
You feel safe. You think we've accomplished this, they'll never take it away from us. But if you look at history from a longer arc, women specifically have gained and lost rights many, many times, right? We're not safe.
Hmm. Nope.
Why women continue to lose rights is a whole other question. But and I'm making it about gender, but of course you could make this conversation about,
No.
sexual
Race,
identity, race, many things,
sexual
right?
identity,
Um,
anything. Yes.
right, exactly. People have the right to have rights. And I wanted that in
Yes.
the book a little bit without being too in your face. Um, but I guess that's my view on modern day feminism. I don't know. Did I answer your question? I kind of just went on a rant.
Yes. Yes. I think so. People have the right to have rights, and I think that what America has become in particular is a culture that is amazing at 3-second marketing sound bites.
Yeah.
And so when we think about giving other people rights that they should have, what it's packaged as is taking away rights that people currently have.
Right.
Um, a way to, I think, maybe perhaps visualize that is that we have a fence that only 6'5" people can look over. And uh, right, we can give people rights so that different people have different size boxes so that they can step up and look over the fence. But then it is
Yep.
marketed as no, 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 no. We're going to cut the fence in half and we're going to take away something so that people
Right.
can look over the fence.
Right.
Um, I think there's definitely a lot of privilege. If we're talking about the male epidemic, the male loneliness epidemic, something as a male that I would very much like to say is um, the 3-second soundbite that I will say is that the call is coming from inside the house. The longer explanation that I would like to say is more of a couples therapy centric statement, which is more along the lines of you will never have a happy relationship until you are happy with yourself by
Yeah.
yourself.
Right.
So nobody can fix you but you.
Right.
And
No,
in
that's
the
true.
end,
I
um,
was reading a book the other day, and read a sentence, and I was like, "Well, that stuck with me." I've thought about it for days. It was like in, the Three Pines murder mystery. So it's not a book that was about, but the main character said, if you are a man who loves all women, you love no women. If you are a man who loves one woman, you love all women. I had to think about that for days, but it actually has stuck with me as kind of a good job, Louise Penny, for making me think about that from that perspective. So when I said
Yes.
that to my 18-year-old daughter, she's like, "I can't stand it when men say they love all women." She was like, "I read that as kinda like a little sexist adjacent." You know what I mean? That like, it means they love us as kind of objects to look at, that kind of thing. She was like, "I don't read that as meaningful," like,
Oh,
so I thought
yeah.
that was interesting. I didn't see it that way, but
That
that
is
was
interesting.
informative for me. A new thought for me
The
anyway.
the the way I see a lot of things, and maybe this is because I love history and I love books so much, but people are people, and what makes me better or different than another person?
Yeah,
And I use the word person and not woman and not
yeah,
black
right.
and not right. So, anyway, my neighbors are two gay men, and they walk their dog just like my heterosexual neighbors over here. They
Yeah,
also walk their dog. There's no
right,
difference,
right.
right? We just walk our dogs, and we just want to have enough money to have a house that our dog can live in, right? That's
Yeah.
that's really what this
Yeah,
is.
that's it. We're all kind of the same in the end. And not just like today, but I think you could use that like we're not that different. I think the worldview is different. You said something about thinking at the very beginning where you touched your head. And it made me think that ancient Egyptians thought you thought with your heart. They didn't have this distinction
Mm.
between brain and heart that we do. So my last book, which was straight historic fiction, I tried to kind of use that. Like originally when I started to write that, I didn't want to use words like think or in my head or you know what I mean? But that was impossible in modern languages. So there are ways that they're so different from us that we can't put it into our language. But in more meaningful ways, they loved their kids, we love our kids, right? They had dogs, we have dogs. They got hungry,
Mhm.
we get hungry. I mean, we're not that different. People are just people.
That is very interesting because I think very specifically corporate America has made a huge distinction between EQ and IQ. They're
Right.
two different skill sets and you have to develop them separately. But if the book world and connecting with writers and readers has taught me anything, they're extremely connected.
Yeah, definitely. And the ancient Egyptians would have seen them as intrinsically connected. So that loops back to something you asked about ISIS. I mean, yes, EQ, is a clear part of intelligence.
Hmm.
You get that in the wisdom literature. That's kind of supported in a lot of ancient Egyptian thought. So I definitely wanted her to be wise in both of those ways. And they wouldn't have made that distinction, I don't think.
So talking about ancient Egypt, well, let's take our conversation about feminism. I know you said it's kind of hard to apply it to ancient Egypt, but I do think that ancient Egypt was a bit ahead of its time insofar as they had larger than life queens, you
Yeah,
know,
right.
and they had an enormous system of priestesses
Yeah,
and powerful female figures in its mythology, whereas most of the other mythologies are very male centric. So, um, given those, how do those two things, our modern day feminism, how does that get molded back onto ancient Egypt, or did they have their own brand of it, et cetera, et cetera? I'm talking about an intersection. Difficult to phrase a specific question, I suppose.
Um, so many thoughts about that. So let me kind of go back to the first thing. We mentioned how long Egyptian history is. You can literally
Mhm.
track by things like titles, right? In the Old Kingdom, when the pyramids were built, you have women with doctor titles. By the time you get to the Middle Kingdom, you don't have that anymore. What has changed from the Old Kingdom, to the Middle Kingdom, where women lose these prestigious equal titles? Bureaucracy. I mean, writing has
Ooh.
erupted. Only 1% of people are trained to write. Those tend to be all men. So now jobs that were with elite, well, high-born women are going to men who are coming up through a bureaucracy. So you see this shift. Get to the New Kingdom. At the beginning of the New Kingdom, you just have some badass queens. I mean, those ladies are
Mhm.
bringing it. And they one of the first queens of the New Kingdom, what she does is she empowers this new priestess role called a god's wife, which not just is prestigious, but has a ton of money. Like it's a very wealthy cult. That cult fuels the most well-known female pharaoh, Hatshepsut. She has that title. She ends up using those riches, I think, probably to become pharaoh. Um, After her reign, women are kind of put back in a box again. So you can look at it in a way that you see, during Hatshepsut's reign, One
Mhm.
guesses she's mindful of this and it's intentional. There are a lot more priestesses, and the priestesses are getting higher titles. After her reign, the richness of that particular title, the God's wife, continues, but without the resources that really make it powerful. And women are losing titles again. Now, for a long time, people read that as a reaction to her reign. I don't I think the situation is much more complicated, but certainly, um, I don't know if we can completely write that off either. But what you can see is women gaining and losing, like fighting these same battles that women are fighting today and
Yes.
losing those battles, right? It's not as people think today. Well, we won, so it's won. No, no.
No.
You have to keep fighting that battle because it just goes away. You know what I mean? You lose that progress. People lost that progress. But they don't I don't think it would be I know they wouldn't talk about it the way we talk about it, but I don't think people ever, any place, really want to have less rights than other people.
No.
So I do think they are in some ways fighting those same battles, just with different language and maybe understandings of it, and less maybe systemic than the way we think about it. They're fighting for themselves, their family. We're fighting
Yes.
for all women everywhere all the time. You know what I mean? There's kind of a different notion.
Well, yeah, it's just like how economic systems have changed over time. It went from very local to regional to um, national to
Yeah,
uh, international to
global.
global, right? But we're still thinking about and doing the same things. The scale of it just sort of changes.
Yeah. Now the
And
other
when the
thing that
scale
you're
changes, the marketing changes. And when I
Mhm.
mean marketing, we have the same battles, we just package them. They're repackaged.
Yeah.
Everything about history you can essentially boil down to the concept of the iPhone, right? And this is not hating on Apple per se. I think
Okay.
it's just a great visual. They sell you the exact same damn thing every 6 months, but it is new and improved and
Yeah.
higher priced but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it can be said about racism and slavery and suffrage and um, everything. So
Yeah. Yeah, you're just fighting the same things over and over again. It just never ends. It's like we're all just hamsters on a wheel. The other thing your question got at, I wanted to circle to, was does it matter if we imagine God as a woman? Right? I mean, that's kind of what you were also getting at, this intersectionality
uh-huh.
of politics and religious belief. I think it really
Yeah.
does matter. I mean, I think patriarchy is emboldened, enabled if you can completely remove women from the divine. So to kind of elevate goddesses and mind people, their absence is intentional and consequential. People did that on purpose. And, you know, that matters still today in a way.
Y- Yes, I think in a lot of my studies, one of the things that I've always found to be the most interesting and the most fascinating, and it's more or less in every single area of the world that comes to my mind, but it's the idea that the vast majority of, I guess we're going to have to use this word, pagan religious systems are very female centric
Yeah,
because the female is the bearer and the creator of
right,
life. And isn't that the
right.
most the most?
Miraculous. Yeah, yeah,
So it has always fascinated me that being the case, that we have that history, right? And you can find it in Germanic, you can find it in Nordic, you can find it in our own here Native American backgrounds, you can find it in Rome and everywhere. How is it that has been developed away? Maybe not how is it, but it baffles me that it is that it
this
has
is
been
how
done
I
away.
got interested in ancient history. As a kid, I was in this small town in Utah, and sort of my escape was sci-fi. I just read I mean, I was like, "I don't know if I wanna go to this church anymore, but I definitely want a pet dragon." That sounds like way more up my alley. So I was real into fantasy books. That's how I spent my time, and that was a little bit of a gateway to Greek mythology. And I started to read Greek mythology, and I was like, "Why do they get female gods and we don't? Like, that seems
Yeah.
cool." And I read things like Gerda Lerner's creation of patriarchy. Those kind of things are what sort of prompted me to kind of go back to school, go back to grad school. I mean, I had been out of college and had a perfectly lovely career going when I went back to grad school. And it really was, I wanted to understand how did that happen? I can't say I wish I had a pithy answer for y'all, but I do think it was intentional, and I think it matters in how we think about ourselves because yes, women are the idea that women should be removed from creation when our experience of the world is that women are very involved with creation doesn't really make a lot of sense. We believe a lot of things that don't really make a ton of sense.
It is fascinating to me that how do I say this in a PC way? Some individuals who are a mere ingredient in a process can think of themselves as being so vastly important to that process.
I mean,
Anyways, that's
try
a
to
rhetorical
imagine.
statement, I
You
suppose.
make your contribution, but it's not quite the 10-month and then multi-years out. It's not quite the same. But we couldn't do it without you guys. It's cool.
So, man, this is such a
We've gone far from the books, haven't we?
we've gone far from the books, but I think that the books have a lot of what we've talked about
Yeah.
in them. And I think one of while reading, we all have connotations, we all have expectations. And with the modern day browbeating of feminism, I picked up this book like, this is going to be fascinating. I want to see, how over the head I'm beaten with this. And you never are. And I feel like the only way that you are, as a reader, you get this messaging of feminism, it's all saved for the epilogue. And I thought that that was a fantastic way to essentially hook your reader and take them for a ride and give them a payoff at the very end. Was that
Huh.
intentional or did it just happen?
Well, I knew that's where I would end. I mean, I wanted to that messaging that's not in the epilogue, but really the other piece of that I think is there's a conversation between Isis and Selkut when she thinks all is lost, where you understand her character arc is becoming comfortable with being a single mom. I that was one piece of that end, and the other is what you're referencing in the prologue, where I just kind of wanted to tie together what it meant, what she means to me, what
Mm,
being an empowered woman looks like sort of at the level of us, and then what looks like, which is the Selkut scene, right? I'm fine. I've grappled with my loss. I'm okay by myself. I can find peace. And then in the epilogue, you get this is what it means, like as a symbol for people everywhere. Kind of a bigger meaning of that.
yeah. I loved that bow, by the way.
Thank you.
It was a very full circle. I thought it it did a lot towards meaning in the book, but I thought it also did a lot narratively. And I thought it was a really, really great writing choice.
Thank you.
Um,
I never quite know where to start books, but I often know where to end them. So I was clear on how I wanted that to end. I'm not as happy with the first couple pages, but I am happy with the last couple pages. So thank you. That's nice.
so I know that generally writers have an audience in mind, but so I work in the IT world, and I can tell you that when designing software, you test, you write your requirements, and you test and you test and you test. And there's this meme out there where it's like we're going to build a bar, and the testers go in and they order a beer, and they order water, and they order in beers, and blah 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 blah. They do all of the testing for the bar that they can, and then when the bar opens, the first customer comes in and asks where the bathroom is, and the bar explodes in flames. Right? Uh, because you, as the creator, you can never think of
Right.
who will read it or what they will take from it.
Yeah.
So, with that in mind, I would like to ask you. You can have, I'm going to say, two main groups of readers. You're going to have dudes reading your book, and you're going to have um, women reading your book. And do you have a main message that you wish each of those cohorts might take from it?
Ah, that's such an interesting question. Okay, so as a writer, you're right, you do have an audience in mind, and I knew that this is gonna be I mean, most of my readers are going to be women. That's who reads the goddess genre. These are women who took women's history courses. I mean, that's kind of who's into this genre. And so I wanted them to to sort of see themselves reflected, but also have some new thoughts. I hoped that I could embed some ideas um, that might make them kind of, think of something new. So that one was easier. For men, what I hope they take away is kind of what you've expressed. I mean, I'm not trying to come at you. The book is not about like making women equal. That's not the point. But I do want to discuss equity. I do want you to think about sort of what it looks like, what a female god looks like, right? What does a goddess look like? Why is that important? What do we miss in the modern day without that? How does it impact the way we think about the women in our lives? And should
Mhm.
we self reflect on that? Should we think, huh, do I think I'm superior because God is a man? I think it is in some ways that simple. I think patriarchy is effective because patriarchy has made some messages really, really simple. That and I hope that if I challenge that in some unprovocative, kind, empathetic way, that would be a win for me.
Yes, and I think I think what you're doing and by doing that is taking it you're giving people a wonderful stepping stone. I think if I could verbalize what I mean by that, when the federal decision about Roe v. Wade occurred, there was an outpouring of men on the internet going, "But I have daughters." And, like,
Yeah.
that's a great starting point.
Yeah, that
But
is a
the
good
thing
starting
is
point.
that women exist whether you have a daughter or not.
Right.
People exist whether you have kids or
I love that.
spouses
Yeah.
or not.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
feel like what you're expressing here is sort of an intermediary stepping stone between those two things.
Yes.
And furthering that conversation, I think is very important.
Well, because of course, the last thing I want to do is challenge someone's actual convictions or religious beliefs. I'm
Right.
not trying to take something away from somebody by challenging what they believe. I'm just trying to say, yeah, but other people have different beliefs, and they might kind of they can be educational even if you hold on to your current beliefs. Like you don't have to, stop believing what you're believing to understand that there is kind of wider perspectives in the world.
We've discussed a lot about Egypt, mythology, feminism, political climates, et cetera, um, in the context of history, believe it or not. So now, I don't know what your experience has been, but my experience, and I know the experience of many of people that listen, they we largely encounter two types of forms of history, right? And this is obviously there's shades of gray here, but hyperbole, yes. The number one, you have like the tactical and the strategic type of history. It focuses on dates, quantities, names. AP
Yeah.
history in high school.
Right.
That
Right. Right.
BS.
Yeah.
And then you have um, a narrative type history that tells you a story. It puts it in context. It humanizes it. It makes you understand what it was like to be there, but maybe it doesn't let you know about the bigger picture. So, firstly, I know that that was a little hyperbolic, but would you agree or disagree with that?
No, I see that. I think there is kind of history with the big H and history with the little h and,
I like
social
that.
history and political history. There's a lot of different ways to think about history for sure. Um, but yes, this idea of narrative history versus kind of fact-based history, I guess, is what you're getting at.
Yes. So, do you see yourself as a narrative historian? And if so, what made you want to become that way?
I love that question. Do you know when I went to grad school, I literally wanted to be Robert Graves because I had read
Okay.
I had read, I, Claudius, and that, again, this I had been gone from, like, a kid that read fantasy books about dragons to reading sort of Greek mythology, that kind of thing, and I thought, "Wow, that's a book that kind of made me learn while I was having so much fun." So when I went to University of Chicago to get my PhD, I kind of thought I was in training to be to be Robert Graves, but you're
Right.
there about 12 minutes and you're like, that is not where this is going at all. You know what I mean? Like we're going to learn how to decline verbs. That's what this is about. So, um, y I'm not a pedantic person, I'm a creative person, but to get through the program like that, you become a pedantic person because you
Right.
have to do that in order to kind of be in that
Yes.
world, and I think if you look at historians who do big history, the Gerda Lerners, the Jared Diamonds, like, people are trying to explain big things. They get beat up because they get some of the little facts wrong, right? But they do have something big and important to say, and it might still be valid even if they're not bringing all the facts to bear. Because I did not end up making a living in academia. Yeah, I would say that I am sort of more interested in narrative history. Um, I think that fact-driven history is also written from a point of view you might just be less selective self-reflective about it. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
Ancient Egyptologists tended to be, for a long time, were white men, right? That's everything. There are a lot
Sure.
of images of ancient Egyptian women that have tattoos. They have tattoos on their thighs, tattoos different places, and those women were written off by men thousands of years later, as kind of loose women, right? The idea is that this was a sign of prostitution because who has tattoos? I mean, in that age, in the 19th century, a tattooed woman, you know what I mean? Like she's in a circus or
Mhm.
she's a prostitute. That's all there is. So that's how they saw that. So that's how they thought about that. More people get into academia, including women and men with tattoos and all sorts of different kinds of people, and they're like, "Now hold on, maybe that's not what these tattoos mean." Right? They could mean a lot of things, we don't know exactly what they mean, but, in my last book, which is about the Pharaoh Hatshepsut's daughter, Neferura, I do kind of, have a bunch of tattooed women to kind of address this, but they might be
Mm.
a religious affiliation, they might be like a prestigious position, they're painted on tomb walls. So they're somebody, right? You don't get to be shown on a tomb wall if you don't have a little clout. So I think that people who consider themselves fact-based historians are also bringing a point of view to the facts and the facts they ask, the questions they ask, and the way they interpret them. So I guess I'm not sure that's as clear cut a difference. Um,
Okay.
and on the flip side of the same coin, someone who's doing narrative history can explore the real world in ways that are innovative and thought provoking, but advance our understanding of real world happenings. So they both have a place, but I'm not sure that I believe they're quite as distinct. I had my original, I'm going to just tell you guys a secret. My original mentor at University of Chicago had on his door, he had a little quote, one quote, and it said, "Theory like mist clouds the eyes." And here I am, his mentee, being like, "I wanna, look at ancient history through you know, through a lens of, like, queer and feminist ideologies and stuff," and he was like, yeah, it was such a clash. Fortunately, someone else, ended up being my mentor, and I survived, but I almost didn't survive just because we had a different thing, but he was a beautiful scholar. His work was amazing. Really one of the most interesting scholars I've ever worked with. Did a lot of Egyptian religion, and while I love his work, I do think there are points where you could look at his work and you can sort of see these opaque assumptions that he didn't second guess. So, we all have biases and we all have assumptions, and it's just useful to self-reflect on those things. So, I think that makes you a better historian and a better, storyteller.
I think that's really interesting, with the idea that, every writer has a perspective and an agenda of sorts, and it's really just the writing style being a vehicle for that perspective. And almost then it's kind of up to the reader to interpret, which is kind of interesting because one of the number one tenet of rhetoric is that the intended message doesn't matter and it's the received message that matters. And I almost wonder if one type of writing style helps impart that message better, meaning that the intended message becomes the received message.
Yeah, that's interesting. I do think transparency matters. When I wrote my dissertation years later, many, so many years later, um, I had a kind of the first chapter of my dissertation is really a fun read. Anybody would like to read it, and it drove one of the scholars on my committee crazy he was like, "Why are you writing like this?" Right? Sound smarter. Where another much older guy was like, "Oh, this is fun. I like that it's fun to read." You know what I mean? Like
Yes, I do.
there's a way to write that makes you sound like all knowing. And that is a
Yep.
very common way to write in academia.
Yes.
I
Yes.
don't know if that helps us in understanding so much as being able to see, well, this is the writer's bias worldview. I can take that into account as I understand what they're saying because they're taking it into account. Or even if they're not, at least I
Yes.
can. So I think that transparency aids understanding, I would say. I'm biased
I
though,
like
'cause I'm writing fiction books, not historical books. So there you go. You gotta know where I stand on things.
yeah. Something in the guise of historical books, right? A question that I generally like to ask authors, which I think is always really interesting for authors who come up with something from nothing,
Yeah.
is where do your book ideas come from? But with history, the stories are already there. So I kind of want to ask you this question, but like, is this a process of discovery? Is it a process of reimagination? So, like, I guess the question is,
Yeah.
given that all of the stories exist already, in that context, how do the ideas for your books come to fruition or come to light?
Yeah, that I mean, I have let me just kind of say that how different this book writing experience was from my last book writing, because that was a historical fiction, but it was about the Pharaoh Hatshepsut's daughter, Neferura,
Yes.
about whom we know literally nothing. We don't know when she died, we don't know if she got married, we know her titles, and that's it, that's all we know. So in that, I was kind of coming up with my own story. There's a lot of real history in that book in terms of objects people are holding, like, there's a lot of real history, far more than there is in this book, but not in her story. Her story is just completely and it was I like the word discover you used. That was like me being like, "Huh, I'm gonna pretend like I'm in this girl's head and what happens." So my first draft of that was just like every chapter I was like, "Oh, is that what you did next? Fascinating." I was just kind of trying to put myself in that headspace and think through what she would be. In this case, there's scaffolding to Isis's story.
Mhm.
A lot of the scaffolding competes. There are bits of story that aren't really part of his story, but I kind of put in there. But I had a lot to work with. So you're not really discovering, you're just reinterpreting. So I think that it kind of maybe, for me at least, those are two really different stories. And I had two really different kind of positions going into it because of what I had to work with. Nothing or very little and way a ton of stuff, and it kind of impacted my process a lot. I will say that this book was much faster than the last book to write.
The plot grid was kind of already filled in.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
There's an arc, a narrative arc to Isis's story. I don't think you could write this about any other Egyptian god or goddess. I don't think anyone else has the clear narrative arc that Isis has. That's because she is the most worshipped of all the Egyptian gods. I mean, nobody else is worshipped as long, as passionately. There's still temples to Isis today. There are people who still worship Isis. She's still with us in some ways, and she's certainly with us in Christian imagery. The early Christians trying to tempt pagan communities and make them feel comfortable, took the
Hmm.
long-standing images of Isis with Horus and turned them into the Madonna and Child. I mean, there's a
Yes.
very clear transition in those images. In some cases, literally the same image that was Isis and Horus and now
Yeah.
is relabeled as, Madonna and Child. So, we still have her imagery with us in that really poignant, powerful, imagery today. So I'm sorry, I kinda went off question, but I think yes and yes. Yes,
Yeah.
discovery, yes, reorganization or whatever. It's just depends on what you're working with.
Okay. So take a step back. What's what is the spark that makes you go, I want to discover or reimagine that?
Yeah.
Like,
Um,
if we're going to talk about your next book, where would that idea even come from? What sparks in your soul or your mind or both?
I think you have to for me, I have to know whose point of view, and that's gonna be kind of historical women. That's kind of the point of view I want to write from. Um, and then I think it's like some interesting thing happens. The next thing I would like to write is about King Tut's sister bride. Kind of like
Okay.
a murder mystery, but also because I don't know if you know much about Tut's family. You may be familiar with the heretic King Akhenaten, who
Yep.
tries to overthrow the old gods and have everybody worship one god. So I like her story because you can talk about this monotheism and what it means to women in that moment. Um, and also kind of I love a murder mystery, so I think you could do that. So that's my spark. Is it helps me speak to various things that interest me.
Okay. Um, okay.
And that
So I was
I
taking
have
a step
something to
back.
say now. Let me say, I think you have to feel like I have something to say. It might not be all that interesting to other people, but I at least think I have something to contribute to the conversation on this topic.
Okay. So take a step forward with
Okay.
the something you've written the story. I mean, you've already written multiple, but let's say hypothetically a new one. You've written the story.
Yep.
Historians tend to think of themselves as preserving stories, while novelists or writers think of themselves as creating stories. And you're at this crossroads.
Yeah.
Do you connect yourself with either of those? Do you think either of those has more power or noteworthiness than the other?
Not necessarily, but what I will say is I'm more comfortable as a historian because you just don't go through that kind of academic rigor without feeling like, okay, I had to learn something. I didn't go through that for nothing. Whereas I feel like I'm still learning how to be a good writer, right? So I don't have a background in writing. I'm a reader, basically. That's my background in writing. I do have a solid background as a historian. So when I write, I try to ignore the history. I never research. I research after the fact to make sure I wasn't wrong because it gets
Interesting.
in my way. The first thing I ever wrote, I gave to a writing coach, and she was like, great story. Now take every bit of history and highlight in yellow everything that's historical, and then highlight in green the things you actually need for the story because this reads like a fun dissertation. So, yeah, when I did that, I was like, "Wow, that's a lot of unnecessary stuff," because I'm like, "Yeah, but it's interesting. It's so interesting. Readers wanna
Uh-huh.
know this," but it doesn't fit for the story. So, I have learned, like, put on my writer hat, write it as a writer, and then after I'm done, put on the scholar hat and be like, "Did I get some stuff, like, factually wrong, that I need to clean up? Like, is there anything that if somebody comes at me, I'm gonna have to be like, 'Oh, man, I didn't know that. That was stupid.'" Like, you do you are trying to, like, be accurate, as I'm sure all historical writers
Hmm.
are, whether you're in narrative or fact-based. Like, you want it to be not wrong. If not accurate, because some of it you can't know if it's accurate, at least historically plausible. That's kind of where the bar has to be. I don't know what happens, but this is a plausible. You can't
Yeah.
prove it wasn't this.
And it sounds like when you were talking about going back to school, you kind of went back to school with a lens,
Yeah.
and then that lens sort of got taken away through the academic
Yes.
process,
Correct.
which I've been there. I know what you're talking about. But now that you're writing all of this stuff, do you feel like writing fiction has changed the way you think about history, or do you feel like you're more reconnecting with who you once were?
The latter for sure. It feels like I have more freedom to kind of reconnect and be what I was originally trying to be and then got off track. And now it's like, oh yeah, I could step back into this role. I got there through a very complicated circuitous route, but whatever. That's where I'm at now and all. And I'm enjoying it.
How
So and
how
also because
absolutely fitting is that? Because
right.
history is not linear, and
Yep.
now your story with history is not linear, and I love that.
Correct.
That's a
Yes.
great full circle moment.
I love that too.
The life of a writer is never over.
Yeah.
This book is coming out in, I guess, about
June
a month
23rd.
from our
Yes.
conversation.
Yes.
Um, and for people listening to this, it'll probably be out roughly 2 weeks from when this conversation goes live.
Okay.
I got to fudge with that. But do you have anything else planned that we should be on the lookout for, or that you're percolating back here in your mind?
Well, I've mentioned what I'm working on now, the next book going on. Other than that, I mean, I do a little newsletter. You can sign up on my website. I'm on IG, just on Instagram as Malayna Evans. I mean, one thing I love a good book launch. I really do. So in fact, I spent last weekend coming up with bespoke cocktails for my book launch because I'm just kind of extra in that way. And my book launch is going to be at the University of Chicago Museum, which I mentioned on June 27th. So if you have any Chicago area listeners, they are welcome to join. There will be bespoke cocktails and lots of ices. Kind of what I'm looking forward to.
If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to conclude our conversation on a bit of a pondering note of sorts. So we've spent the whole our time together talking about essentially stories and ethics and morals and things that have survived for thousands and thousands of
Yeah,
years. And this wasn't initially something I was going to say, but since you were originally a fantasy reader, I would like to just say maybe hopefully you're familiar with Robert Jordan.
sure. Absolutely.
Famously wrote at the beginning of each of his Wheel of Time novels. Hopefully I don't butcher this. Something along the lines of ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend, and legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gives it birth comes again. That's his whole
Right.
Wheel of Time thing. Um, but I think what he's saying and what we've discussed for the past hour ish is that empires disappear, cities crumble, religions change, but somehow the stories of all those things
Yeah.
endure.
Yeah.
So, why do you think that stories seemingly outlive nearly everything else that humanity creates? And I guess at what point do you think a myth stops becoming merely a story and it kind of transcends into something else?
Wow, that's a big question. I mean, I think it is human to love stories. I mean, stories trigger dopamine in the brain, right? We can kind of see at a kind of molecular, at a biological level, how much we react to stories. So this isn't probably new. I mean, there we are kind of hardwired to understand things, and then I think so. That's what happens with us as individuals. But the other thing stories do is they connect. They create these shared connections,
Mhm.
like, we're all just here alone in our own bodies, you know what I mean? Slowly working towards death. And so maybe it just helps us to be like, there's meaning and we have these shared connections, these shared histories. And that may be like a small group or it could be like the whole world. It works on so many different levels. And maybe the stories that endure are those that kind of speak most directly to the bits of us that are most universal, right? There are things that kind of emotions, love, grief, um, hope, disappointment, right? Nobody
Mhm.
anywhere can understand these things, right? These are part of the human experience. And so maybe stories just remind us that we may be here for a speck of time, but in other ways, the collective big we, kind of go on. I don't know. That's that's my off the thought. That's my attempt at a deep thought. I don't know.
I love it. I love it. One more time for all of our listeners. The novel is Isis of Egypt, Goddess of Thrones by the amazing writer and my guest, and dare I say, my new friend, uh, Malayna Evans. Um, Malayna,
Mm.
would you like to plug where people can connect with you or where they might be able to purchase this gem?
Sure. You can follow me on Instagram at Malayna Evans. You can sign up to my newsletter. I don't do a ton of newsletters, but usually when I do, I'm giving stuff away at my website, MalaynaEvans.com. And for anyone around on June 27th in the Chicago area, my book launch is going to be lots of fun with some really delicious bespoke cocktails. I am soaking bourbon in dates right now, y'all. It's going to be a lot of fun. So you can see me at the University of Chicago Museum. Those who are a little older might think of it as the Oriental Institute, but it is in fact now the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures and has an amazing exhibit right now about Nubian bestiary. Not about this, but also a real cool exhibit.
On that note, thank you so much for joining me.
This was such
Um,
a fun conversation. Thank you so much for having me. I love talking about
Thank
books
you.
and the world and people and politics and all with you. That was great.
I thought it was awesome to nerd out about something outside of just feels. Um,
Yeah.
so if the listeners would like to keep in touch, please feel free to leave a comment, send an email, et cetera, et cetera. Both my own and Malayna's contact information I'll link down into the description below. And thank you so much for clicking on this one and listening. Until next time, cheers.